Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Forecast. I'm your host, Storm Team 12 meteorologist Megan Hanna, and I'm very excited to kick off our first episode of this new show. This is a show where we're going to get a little sciencey. We're going to kind of go behind the curtain of your typical Storm Team 12 forecasts and go a little deeper behind the science of the weather, answer all of your questions that you may have that Storm Team 12 may not be able to answer in a 3-minute forecast, just telling you on 12 News. So that is what this show is for. Now, research shows that communities that are weather salient or that know a little bit more about weather because of the events that they have been through are just more educated on the weather. They know a little bit more, and I would consider Central Mississippi in that bunch. So we're going to give you a deeper dive into the forecast, answer all of your questions, have some special guests on, and you may recognize some of those faces from Storm Team 12. Today, I'm very excited for this episode. We're going to be talking about the peak of hurricane season and the latter half of the hurricane season. It was a very quiet peak, and a lot of us thought, well, that's pretty unusual, right? Well, you're exactly right. It is pretty unusual, and things are still lying ahead for the latter half of the season. We're seeing that right now with the tropics now back active. Another major hurricane in the bunch called Gabrielle. So we're going to dive into that into today's show. I hope you enjoy it. Well, the official peak of hurricane season on September 10th has come and gone, but we are still lying within the peak month of hurricane season. Look at the graph in front of you. See those lighter red values? Well, that means that those peak in this month and that we've typically seen a couple named systems only in this month, but also across the first half of the season, a couple hurricanes and even a few major hurricanes possible by this point in the season. Now, it's kind of a gradual climb upwards to the peak of hurricane season when it officially starts on June 1st. It's kind of slow for many of the summer months. Things really start to pick up in August, especially September, because that's the peak month of hurricane season. And then the decline is kind of fast into the end of November. Now, hurricane season officially ends November 30th, so we still do have a ways to go, but especially in the peak months of hurricane season, we're watching an area quite closely called the Main Development Region. That's shaded there in orange in front of you, and that spans from 10 degrees latitude to 20 degrees latitude, stretches all the way from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean. And this is a prime breeding ground for tropical systems for this time of year, especially in August to September, just because the waters have had many months to warm over the summer months, but also there's very high moisture in that area near the equator. We need the moisture for those thunderstorms to form, therefore become clusters of storms, become organized as a low pressure system, and therefore start to take on tropical characteristics. Also, we do need low wind shear, and that area has it typically in August to September. That means that there is no very fast winds that are trying to break those thunderstorms apart and allows them to kind of just build up into some more robust thunderstorms and not be a stable environment anymore. Take a look at the diagram in front of you. I want you to pay close attention to that red shaded line. That's the intertropical convergence zone. You might have heard Storm Team 12 mention the ITCZ, and that's an area that overlaps with the Main Development Region, and that's where we watch for those African easterly waves. Those are areas of some thunderstorms that come off the west coast of Africa, and they're able to build up because of the northeasterly trades and the southeasterly trades converging at the ITCZ. Similar, like low-pressure thunderstorms here in the southeast, when you have winds converging, there's nowhere to go but up. That's when you get rising air and thunderstorms building, and that's why we see thunderstorm activity around the ITCZ. Those African easterly waves can take on tropical characteristics in the Main Development Region. I know a lot of people have said, well, the first half of the season has been quiet. What's going on out there? We don't have a lot of hurricanes. And you're really not wrong, but we don't need to underestimate the second half of the season. We've already seen that. The peak was very quiet, but now we have major hurricane Gabrielle out in the Atlantic and multiple areas of possible development that we're watching. So let's take a look at each month of the latter half of the hurricane season. What we typically see with those, we know that, of course, September is the peak month of hurricane season. Most likely, is development is shaded there in red. So that means those systems form in the main development region that we just talked about, travel northwest, and just go north of the Caribbean and take a northward track close to Bermuda. Again, that's what Major Hurricane Gabrielle, that's the track that that system took on. Also, the systems that form in the main development region can push northwest, just clip the Caribbean, and then head towards Florida or the East Coast. Of course, that one hits a little bit closer to home just because that could have impacts to the United States. Again, we're watching for some developments this week in the tropics that look like they're going to take that path. So that is just a clear indicator that this area is primed this month for these paths to take place. And the warm waters are also not only in the main development region, but also in the Gulf. That's why some paths can form just south of the Caribbean or south of Jamaica, take northwest turn, and then once it gets into the very warm waters of the Gulf, that's when it's kind of like, where is it going to go? Now, a lot of them will try to head back into the Atlantic, go over the East Coast, but this track we also watch closely for us here in the Deep South because, it can take about 500 miles eastward and then start to impact the Northern Gulf, therefore impact us here in the Magnolia State. So again, we watch September closely for all of us, not only on the East Coast, friends in Florida, but also for the Northern Gulf, as some systems can also start to develop in the Bay of Campeche in Mexico and travel straight up the Gulf and impact our neck of the woods. Now, that path is smaller, so it doesn't have as long over those very warm waters to intensify, but still something that we look out for in the month of September. Now, in October, things start to cool down water-wise, and it takes a little bit for the warm waters of the Gulf and the Atlantic to cool down. That's because the heat capacity of water is higher than land, so it's slower to warm up. It's also slower to cool down. Land cools and warms up a lot quicker than water. So still, the waters are warm in October, even though the air and the land may not be so warm. So paths in this month that we look out for is systems developing south of Jamaica, and then again, taking a northwestern turn, tracking closer to the northeastern Gulf Coast or even across Florida, impacting the East Coast, heading out into the Atlantic because those waters are really warm there. And then also you can have paths that develop close to the Caribbean and again track close to Bermuda, heading into the northern Atlantic, and then they dissipate there because of the very cool waters up there. Also into November, I know it's cool for a lot of us airwise, but again, the waters are still quite warm, and the path that we typically see in this month is starting to develop just south of the Caribbean, impacting the Caribbean, and then heading into the Atlantic, again, somewhere in between Bermuda and the East Coast. For us to truly understand what the second half of the hurricane season may entail for the Magnolia State, it's important to note what has been forecasted and what a normal hurricane season looks like. So in the first column on your screen, we have the forecast that the Colorado State University researchers gave in the springtime and said this is what we expect for the season. It is a little bit above average at 17 named storms, 9 of those becoming hurricanes, and 4 of those becoming major hurricane status. Now, on a typical season, we see about 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 of those becoming major hurricanes. When they updated it in August, they took those numbers down a notch at 16 named storms, 8 of those becoming hurricanes, and then they bumped the major hurricane category back to normal. Now, so far in 2025, we've seen 7 named storms. 2 of those were hurricanes, and out of the 2 hurricanes, both of them, Gabrielle and Erin, became major hurricane status. Now, what we typically see through this point in the hurricane season is 10 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and 2 of those becoming major hurricanes. So we're on track for major hurricanes. We're a little bit behind schedule for named storms and also a little bit behind schedule for hurricanes. I know a lot of people have said it's been really quiet out there, especially because we typically see activity in the Gulf, and especially being in the Magnolia State, we hear about it. It can affect our neighbors or even affect us. So definitely being thankful that it's been quiet. But all of this to say is that we cannot let our guard down heading into the latter half of the season because some storms still are likely to be ahead. We've seen that with the scenario of now Major Hurricane Gabrielle forming, but also a couple areas of possible development in the tropics at the very same time. So let's go over why the season has kind of been slow and what we typically see condition-wise when we were expecting it to be a little bit above average. So typically with very warm sea surface temperatures, which we have right now in a neutral INSO phase, which we're in right now, that's typically conducive to a very active peak. That's why a above average season was forecasted, although it's just a little bit above average. Now, earlier in the season, we transitioned from El Nino to a neutral INSO phase, and that's pretty conducive to a active hurricane season. So that is why they kept the above average forecast for this season. Typically, we see low wind shear in the main development region. Again, that's when the winds aren't fast and aren't breaking apart those storms. But the wind shear has been abnormally high. So any areas of development that we've been watching that have a low chance of those African easterly waves that really have been breaking apart, and we've been seeing those kind of dissipate. So we're watching still for the waters to be warm. It does look like the shear is dying down. And now that we're in a neutral INSO phase, that is still conducive to an active peak. Here's a check on the sea surface temperatures right now. So as you can see, they're pretty warm. Again, you have some lighter red values off the west coast of Africa. Again, that's when those African easterly waves form, where those thunderstorms can build into tropical systems along the ITCZ. And then you can see the darker red values are really concentrated towards the northern Gulf, around Cuba, and even along the east coast of Florida. So very warm waters. They're also close to the Bahamas, reading sea surface temperatures around the middle to upper 80s. So we need the waters to at least be 80 degrees for tropical activity to form, and we have plenty of that. Now, to truly get a good grip on what the latter half of the hurricane season could entail for us here in Mississippi, it's important to look at history. History tells us a lot, and we're going to do a fun interactive website segment. And this website is from NOAA, so showing us the past paths of hurricanes that have hit a little too close to home, seeing the same exact conditions that we are right now. So we're going to take off the nautical miles and we'll get going here. So I'm going to take off the nautical miles, and we're going to go to only 0 miles in Mississippi. So now Mississippi is shaded in red. So we're looking at paths that have come through the Magnolia State and impacted us. Now, let's just, for fun, look at the entire season in an neutral INSO phase. So that is what we are in right now. We'll toggle on June, July, and August. So now we are looking at the entire hurricane season. All right, there we go. Okay, so notice that those African easterly waves have impacted systems that we've seen close to home. So even though that is thousands of miles away, again, it's something that we always want to take seriously because history shows that some of those African easterly waves have impacted the Magnolia State in some recent years. Now, we'll continue to look a little bit closer to home. Again, a lot that have developed around the Caribbean and even into the Gulf. You can see there with some of those stems just starting north of the Bay of Campeche and starting to take either a northeast, northern track close to the Magnolia State. And that's another path that we see frequently. And as we saw earlier in the show, that's one path that we watch for closely here in September. Okay, so that's a look at the entire hurricane season, looking at the neutral INSO phase. So that's what we're in right now. Let's just look at the first half of the season. So that's going to mean June, July, and August in a INSO phase. Again, some of these names do ring a bell and bring back some bad memories. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 definitely had similar conditions, and we'll actually toggle on that guy there. Again, did form in the main development region. Again, this was in August, so in the first half of the season. We'll toggle that back on there. And then it went to the, impacted our friends in Texas, and then it impacted northern Mississippi. Again, not as a strong storm, just as a tropical depression, but still, all this to say is that all these paths are possible. All right, let's zoom out a little bit more. Again, we're looking at the first half of the season. The most recent one was Claudette. Again, that was addressed tropical storm status, and that was in 2021. Again, took on a similar path. This was in June, so this was a pretty early system, and that formed just north of the Bay of Campeche, went due north. Again, a tropical storm there. Again, let's see, Hurricane Katrina. Again, a very notable storm formed in the first half of the season with neutral INSO conditions, so conditions that we're seeing right now. Again, this was in August, so in the first half of the season, but still a very notable storm. And it's important to note that this one did form just north of the Caribbean, near the Bahamas, crossed over Florida. Again, we know this path well, but still not to say that those that form north of the Caribbean can't cross westward and take a westward track, head into the very warm waters of the Gulf. That's a scenario that we saw in Katrina, of course, just a devastating storm, and one that just brings back a lot of sad memories for a lot of Mississippians. Let's keep looking down here. Again, just some very notable storms. Hurricane Andrew, that was a very notable one in the first half of the hurricane season. Lots of Floridians definitely have some memories with that one, I know. But all of this to say is that, we just can't underestimate the hurricane season as a whole. Even though there's no notable storms in the first half of the season, that doesn't mean once we hit September, it is all, the hurricane season will slow from here, but still something that we need to be aware of. So let's look at that right now. I'm going to toggle on the latter half of hurricane season. So we're going to do September, October, and November. And of course, we're keeping on those neutral INSO conditions because that is what we're in right now. All right, let's zoom out, see what kind of paths these are taking. All right, so again, we see some of those African easterly wave tracks where those waves form off the west coast of Africa and push due west along the main development region, everything that we've gone over in this show, and then cross over the Caribbean, get into the warm waters of the Gulf. Again, when we were watching for those typical tracks in some previous slides, we saw this path. And it's important to note that, again, this has impacted Mississippi. Again, gets into the very warm waters of the Gulf. And as you can see, with those colors going from green to yellow to red, just like this one. Let's click on this one. There we go. Hurricane Frederick. Another one where it developed in the main development region. We see those green and blue values. Again, that means that was either tropical depression or tropical storm once it went over land and started to weaken. But once it gets into the very warm waters of the Gulf, starts to strengthen to a Category 4 hurricane. That's when it started to enter southern Mississippi. Again, this was in August to September. So it went through the state around mid-September. And again, just something to note that these paths that start way out close to Africa, thousands of miles away, still can hit close to home for us here in Mississippi. Now, the most recent one, I actually tracked this with meteorologist Gracie Morris just about 1 year ago. That was Hurricane Francine. Again, was making its way through the Jackson metro as a tropical depression. Again, we were expecting some tornadoes with that, actually, especially with our friends in the Pine Belt being on the right side of that storm. We ended up not getting any tornadoes. Thankfully, did get a couple flash flood warnings, if I'm remembering correctly. But again, let's look at the path of this guy. Okay, so yes, we did just track out this path in a couple previous slides. Again, forms near the Bay of Campeche and heads north. And that's when it started to head our way as a tropical storm. And then also we had Hurricane Harvey, again, one that is notable for the second half of the season. And let's just see. Again, notice all these dates, September, October, or August, that is. And so here you go. Olga was an extratropical cyclone. So again, all this to say, it's just important to note that these can hit a little closer to home. I do want to put on maybe 60 miles, 60 nautical miles, just to see what our neighbors were looking at with these similar conditions. All right, there we go. So again, a lot of our neighbors close in Alabama as well as Louisiana, a lot of the paths in the second half of the hurricane season did start in the Gulf. So again, even though we're watching the main development region in this time of year, again, it's always just important that we're continuously watching for these hurricanes that could even start in the Gulf. Even if they're just a tropical storm, we know that that can bring flooding, especially depending on the path of it and where exactly it goes. Again, all this to say is that we do still need to be aware in the second half of the season. We've seen that as we were talking about a quiet peak of hurricane season. And now if you look at the tropics, we have Major Hurricane Gabrielle as well as 2 areas of possible development that we're watching. So, of course, stay up to date with Storm Team 12 for all of your tropics information, and we'll keep you updated on 12 News. All right, that's all we have for the first episode of Beyond the Forecast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned a little something. Of course, I do want to know what you think. If you have any outstanding weather questions you want to be answered on the show, feel free to email me there at that contact. And we'll also have some special guests coming. Lots of exciting episodes in the future. So thanks for joining me today on the inaugural episode of Beyond the Forecast. Be on the look for more of these on WJTV Plus, of course, on Apple TV, Fire TV, and Roku. Have a great week.